So thank you everyone for being here, and it's the post-lunch session. I hope post-lunch we can still keep you engaged and interested in the conversation. Just to recap, I lead BCG's operations practice globally. So my domain of work covers supply chain, procurement, manufacturing. And supply chain obviously is one of the areas which has seen a lot of activity in the last few years. In fact, if you take something like trends on Google or conversations in the business world that are happening on social media and try and understand what are the top 3 keywords that are being discussed, supply chain has been among the top 3 for the last 5 years running. So it's obviously a big area of interest. I'll start with a brief perspective from my side and then open the floor for questions to the panelists. My personal belief is global supply chains are in for a massive restructuring which will play out over the next decade or 2 decades. And there are a few mega trends which are driving that. The first is, over the last 5 years and possibly even earlier, every year we've seen supply chain shocks which create a challenge. COVID obviously was the biggest one, unplanned shutdowns in different parts, transportation linkages getting hit, etc. But there have been others, natural disasters, tsunamis, earthquakes, which create a problem. And given how interconnected supply chains are globally in almost every industry, these have created big disruptions on the supply chain side. So what that has led to is the importance of resilience and managing the risk across supply chains has become top of mind for most companies. But this as a mega trend, the risks on the supply chain side, I think, is something which will just continue. It's not going to stop. The second big mega trend that I see happening is geopolitics. And geopolitics has 2 streams. One is conflicts breaking out in some parts of the world, Russia versus Ukraine. Which supply chain and which industry gets hit becomes a challenge. Because you don't even know what supply is coming from these different geographies and which part of the chain will get impacted. But there's a second bigger part, which is the entire issue around the Western Bloc, China, the rivalry and competition between the big countries and what impact that is having. Many companies are looking to de-risk their presence in China. There are challenges and constraints being created on movement of goods around technology access. And again, geopolitics is not going to become easier. If anything, it will continue to remain the way it is. And that has a big implication on supply chains as well. And the third big mega trend in my view is the entire climate and sustainability lens. Almost every large company globally has announced net zero commitments, whether it's in 2030, 2040, 2050. The implication of that is they have to cut down their emissions or carbon footprint in manufacturing as well as in the supply chain. Manufacturing footprint gets impacted because what is the source of energy that you are consuming in your manufacturing process becomes important. If you are manufacturing in a country where a large majority of the power is generated through coal versus in a place where you can have a much more renewable mix, your carbon footprint can be very different. And also if you are manufacturing closer to market, the carbon impact of transportation of goods is lower. If you are transporting goods halfway around the world, the carbon impact becomes bigger. And this again is a factor which is driving many companies to rethink how their global manufacturing networks are set up. So these 3 mega trends, which is the disruptions related to COVID and natural disasters, the carbon impact and geopolitics, in my view, will have a big restructuring on supply chains. And one of the positive things this will spur is innovation. Because as you need to make changes and serve your customers while retaining your cost competitiveness, one of the big drivers for this will be innovation. How much can you innovate from a technology perspective, from a product perspective, and from a supply chain perspective? So with that preamble, let me now go across to my panelists. And JC, if you are there, maybe if I could start with you. Semiconductors is one of the industries which I would say has been at the heart of some of the geopolitical moves that we have seen, especially given current capacity is located to a large degree in Taiwan and some places, and the upstream supply chain is also concentrated in a few areas. And many countries have been looking at diversifying capacity, setting up new capacity in other locations. So if I could just ask you from your vantage point and from your industry perspective, what impact do you see of geopolitics on the overall supply chain?
Hey, thanks, Ravi, and good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I was not able to be in person there. There were some, personal reasons last minute that did not allow me to travel. But anyways, I think the technology works, so I hope I would be able to participate and contribute here effectively. So Ravi, let me give you a little bit of overview of the overall semiconductor industry. I think much more is now known after the pandemic. It became a very popular industry when all of us were not able to get our cars on time, or the cars that we were expecting get on time, or the medical devices were not available at time, and so on. So this industry absolutely gained attention of everybody. And we know today that it is a very, very pervasive, semiconductor is very, very pervasive in every part of the life that we lead, how we work, how we get entertained, how we get, medical attention to education and entertainment and so on, right? And to just give you a perspective, just this decade, um, the growth of this semiconductor industry would double itself. We would be $1 trillion industry by end of 2030. So it just this decade, more than actually doubling itself would happen. Also, technologically, this is one of the very, very advanced industry. From the process, from design, and so on. Very, very highly complex in many senses. Especially the supply chain is one of the most complex parts that we have in this industry, and very capital intensive. When you put in a semiconductor industry, you're talking from anywhere from three to $20 billion, right? In that kind of a range. So why I wanted to give you this perspective was that now it becomes very, very very, very important because of the need of the semiconductors in our lives, because of the complexity that has to be managed, and because of the amount that somebody has to spend, or the companies have to spend to build, any factory or an industry here. So what ends up happening is we have to make sure the technology advancement is happening at the right time. The supply chains are able to cater to the demands and different product mixes, across the world. And we don't land up in the situation what happened, post COVID, where, there was, not enough supply of goods. And that impacted, just as an example, that impacted um, uh, US economy by, they say, growth of 1%, which is huge, because if that economy grows by 2 to 3%, and if you have an impact of semiconductor on the growth by 1%, it becomes a huge perspective. Now, why the supply chain and some of the innovations are very, very important? Because today, where we stand as far as supply chain is concerned in the semiconductor industry, from all the inputs that have to go to manufacture the chip, it has to traverse 70 nations today and up to 50,000 kilometers of travel before the chip gets to the hand of the consumer. So that is the kind of complexity we are dealing with. So I just wanted to start with giving that perspective, and then I can talk a little more about what is being done in this ecosystem.
Great, thanks. Let me come back to you, JC, but one of the specific follow-up questions I would have is, given the complexity, given the importance, how important does it become to set up a domestic industry? And I know India has been making moves to get some of the capacity set up over here. But I'll come back to you with that question. Maybe let me go to you, Pavan. Medical equipment, medical technologies, of course, is one of the big users, but not just on semiconductors. How do you see the impact of all these trends on the medical technology industry? And specifically, what opportunities do you believe this opens up for industry here?
So let me just address your question after commenting on some very fine points you made. Supply chain, as Ravi said, has become the word which is really very popular. and so popular that my mother, who's 91 years of age, has also understood what supply chain is thanks to COVID. She understands our supply chain. The other day she was telling me, "Ab ye value chain kya le aaye tum?" ठीक है? That means she's understood this word. And war beats trade. During the Second World, before the Second World War also, we were a deeply globalized economy. Maybe through different modes of transport, but deeply globalized. Trade broke it. War broke it. So, and the third point which you made was regarding innovation, and I remembered that copper, for example, copper reserves have been shown to be depleting for many years, decades. That copper reserves will run out in 10 years, by 1990, by 2000, etc., but they didn't. Because the ways of extracting copper became more and more efficient, and they could extract unextractable copper. So innovation is very important. We might find alternatives to things like lithium. Also, we might go back the whole circle. Coal was a hero at one time when it raised the standards of living, made difficult things possible through machines. But then, last 15 years, coal became a villain. Now coal is resurging because of geopolitical roadblocks. Coal may resurge, and you will you might feel that, okay, we cannot get alternative sources of energy because of geopolitical roadblocks or supply groups, as Ravi was speaking about, then we will go back. So that kind of reverse innovation also, or retrogression may also come in. Coming to your question, Ravi, in medical technology, we have a very big opportunity now, because you are familiar with the word friendshoring. Friendshoring is different from offshoring. That means doing business with those countries or manufacturing in those countries with who you have long years of peace and a similar market system, similar political system, etc. So the West doesn't match in this criteria with China. Most of the Western countries are antagonistic towards China, and they feel hostility coming from China. So that China plus one alternative is really emerging. Right now, that plus one traffic is going towards ASEAN countries, but it can also turn very quickly towards India. So, because medical technology has entered even the defense space, you can put a bug in your device or in your machine, and thousands of such devices might be in the hearts of people in a country which you are hostile to, and you can activate all those to start creating havoc for the patients who are wearing them just through a cyber attack, cyber interference. You don't have to fire a single bullet. So where will you want to source your products from? From those countries who do not have hostile intentions towards you. So medical technology, that's why is booming. Today our Prime Minister why is he so interested in this medical technology small sector? Because he has understood that this is the keystone, it's a linchpin. Not only will it determine tomorrow health sovereignty, which is another point which has come in, that you have to be self-sufficient not only in food and energy, etc. You have to be self-sufficient in health also. But also, it's an area which is very carefully to be monitored so that no wrong actors can hold us to ransom.
Pavan, that's very interesting perspective. You know, the session is on impact of geopolitics on supply chain, but with your example of embedding chips into medical devices, you are taking impact of supply chain onto geopolitics. So that's an interesting lens, but maybe let me pick up on one of the points you made around, you know, clean energy and coal coming back. And I wanted to get Navjit in because I'm sure you would have a different point of view. But the entire energy mix, energy transition is going to be one of the big drivers of supply chain reconfiguration and how companies are thinking of setting up their manufacturing capacities, etc. What would be your perspective?
Sure. Thanks.
And do you think coal is making a resurgence and will be a hero again?
Thank you so much, Ravi, and very good afternoon to the esteemed audience. Uh, just by way of a very short introduction, Gentari is a company which is 100% owned by Petronas of Malaysia, which is oil and gas upstream, downstream major. And Gentari is a company which has been founded to focus on the sustainable energy initiatives in search for the green molecule. And I think energy as a key component for any form of manufacturing, and the transition from the conventional electrons, the fossil fuel electrons, to actually genuine green energy molecules is something very, very fascinating. And India per se has done a very significant amount of work in terms of policy, in terms of integration of the grid, in terms of the general infrastructure and the various production-linked incentives that have been provided. If we see the three spaces that we work in, the three verticals, and actually it's a concept of singularity connecting the dots. We have renewable energy large scale. We have close to about 2,000 megawatts already in the country. We have green hydrogen and ammonia, and along with that, the other downstream green derivatives, and we have green mobility. And we intend connecting all these dots using country-based technologies and actually delivering genuine green molecule. But when I emphasize on the word genuine green molecule, what we mean is that the renewable electricity that you are going to be producing to actually power these electrolyzers and synthesizers and air separation units, which will give you a replacement for oil and gas molecules, has to be genuinely 100% green. You cannot have cases where you can have solar and wind power being generated supplying 15, 16 hours, and then say in the night, I'm going to be drawing electricity from the grid and running these facilities, because that is not the genesis of an actual green molecule. If it is green, it has to be at levels of 85% plant load factor or a 90% plant load factor, 100% green. And that is what we are working upon. And I would say that the policy enablers which are there in the country, the sort of incentives that are being provided are simply fantastic. The innovation part is not necessary. I mean, a lot of times we speak about storage, that storage is very, very essential, and a lot of things are being done in storage. Innovation is important, maybe finding solutions for things like storage batteries, whether you have to be necessarily on lithium, which you are not really controlling as a reserve in the country because it has been blocked by some other countries also. But what we have found out is, and what we have realized and what we are working on is, that there are technologies which are available, which are in fact as old as 100-year-old technologies. But if you do them the right way, use the right enablers, you can do fantastic storage solutions. And here I will just give you an example of a concept of a pump storage hydro project. A pump storage hydro project basically as a technology is almost 100 years old. It has been there. But it is a technology which has been sort of forgotten. If it is executed well, it's a project, these are projects which can run for 99 years and actually give in the electricity in the utility markets, in terms of large supply of electricity, they can give very genuine storage solutions which we can use to give us actual green power. So the supply chain challenges can be overcome by a mix of various applications. One is innovation, one is locating your supply chain or your manufacturing facilities in the right places, but also at the same time, carefully analyzing the natural advantages that you have of a location and maybe refining some of the old technologies to present levels of automation and present levels of technological advancement, and you could effectively use them. So those would be my first few thoughts, Ravi.
And I think that would be a big driver, because I think where geopolitics and energy get mixed up is with many countries and regions thinking of setting up what you call a carbon border tax. So for any manufacturer, for example, in India who exports to Europe, their carbon footprint becomes very important, or else they will have a tax imposed. And I think some of it is driven by the move towards a cleaner energy or drive towards moving to a cleaner energy environment. Some of it is also translated or translates from protectionism for local industry in the garb of creating a carbon tax. Now, what constitutes how much is always a question mark. Maybe Sanjay, let me come to you. You operate in an industry with a very global manufacturing network, and you have manufacturing locations all over the world, supplying again to many different markets, including India. What changes have you seen over the last few years on how the supply chain network is set up, or how you are serving the customers in different geographies basis all the trends that we see around us?
As a quick introduction, so I work for Bausch and Lomb. So we are a medical device company. 70% of our business is contact lenses, lens care. Then we also are in the ophthalmology, where we've got equipment for cataract and refractive surgery. And some of the aesthetic equipment, which is for skin tightening, wrinkle reduction. So you deal with the dermatologists. So past few years, Ravi, with specifically like when COVID came in, so we have global plants because India only constitutes about like 2% of the total consumption of the medical devices in the country, and very difficult for any multinational company to put plants everywhere in the world. So for example, maybe talk about MRI machines. So maybe in the world, maybe 100 might be sold every year. So you can't like put plants in every country. So that's the situation with most of the medical devices. And if someone thinks of like putting in a manufacturing facility in a particular country, there are like multiple reasons for that, but primarily it's what's the size of your local market. So that's one. But coming back to the question, so during COVID we've seen a lot of supply disruptions happening. Initially because there was no shipments happening, and then subsequently because you're making or manufacturing a medical device, even a small part, for example, he was talking about semiconductors. One component you're not getting, then the entire machine you can't manufacture, right? So we saw that, and as a result, like a lot of back orders were happening, and customers were like crying, and that was eventually kind of impacting the patients. So some of the few steps we've taken, like look for alternate manufacturers and suppliers, both globally and locally, if we can get that. So very recent example, because of Russia and Ukraine war. So because we sell lasers, so lasers runs with a particular gas which comes from Ukraine. And we're not getting it. Correct. And we're not getting it. And the customer started writing to the global CEO that this is what is happening. But so what changes we made? So if we were kind of selling, say, 10 in a month, those cylinders, so we started keeping like more inventory now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of impacting, and then as a result of which your storage costs, you need like bigger warehouses, your cost of inventory management kind of goes up, your MOH goes up. So that's the impact. And sometimes you're able to pass on the cost to the customer, many a times not. So as a result of which your product is also kind of getting expensive. So that's what we're doing locally to find like we can get some of the local manufacturers who can, but then you need to get all those quality approvals from global, from maybe the local regulators. So your cost of compliance is going up, your cost of inventory management is kind of going up.
Yeah.
So that's what we're seeing as a global company.
Okay. Very interesting. One factoid I would share, the point you make, Sanjay, about increased inventory, increased costs, etc. But you have to have those, or you have to incur those to be able to serve your customers. One of the studies that BCG did in North America earlier this year, we surveyed I think close to 500 different executives. And more than 90% of them were willing to give up a few points of margin to have lower risk in their supply chain. So they said, we are happy to have a manufacturing network that is configured towards friendlier countries or where the risk is lower, and we are willing to give up actual margin for that. And some of them have actually been making moves on their network in order to do that. But the other point, Sanjay, you made was one of the big drivers or decision criteria for companies to decide the location for manufacturing is the size of the domestic market. So maybe with that, JC, if I could come back to you. Semiconductors and chips obviously is a category where there is a huge domestic market. All automotive manufacturers, medical equipment manufacturers, consumer durables, chips are sort of getting embedded into almost every product that you can think of, which you had also mentioned. But we don't really have domestic capacity for semiconductors. So do you see this as a big opportunity area in a way for India, and also an imperative for us to localize our capacity or localize manufacturing capacity in India? And if yes, what do you think are some of the big challenges or barriers we need to overcome to attract more manufacturing capacity into India, more specifically in semiconductors?
Yeah, sure. Hey, Ravi, just before directly answering that question on manufacturing and should we do it in India, yes, I would say, absolutely we should do it. It's the right thing to do. But we have to understand there are three aspects in a very simple terms. It's a complex industry, but three aspects of it. One is the design element of it, where all of these, chips, gets designed. The second aspect is what you're talking about, the manufacturing, the semiconductor manufacturing units, and what we call it ATMPs or OSATs, which is testing units, which are also within the manufacturing, function. And the third one is all the components that serve the manufacturing, whether it is materials, gases, chemicals, equipment, and so on and so forth. Right? So that is the three verticals, if you will, in the simple terms, how you can categorize this industry into. Now, if you look at India, on the design perspective, we are very, very strong. We have, captive units like our company, GlobalFoundries. We are a manufacturer, semiconductor manufacturer across the world. We are one of the most diverse, manufacturing companies, where we have plants in US, Europe, and also in Singapore. But in India, we do a lot of IP development, design, technology work, like many other companies do. So we are very strong in the design part of it. I think in the manufacturing part, we do not have a manufacturing plant in India. Now, to answer now, coming back to your question straight, should we do it? Absolutely. Should we do it because supply chain is getting disrupted because of the COVID lessons? Not necessarily just because of that. But if you look at overall industry, it's doubling itself this decade. The consumption in India of semiconductor ecosystem is around 27 to 28 billion. Don't pick my number because, that may not be exactly accurate, but in that ballpark. Right. And all the indications show that by 2030, we would be around more than 100 billion consumption in India. So, you really have a market that you can, cater to. Now, if all of this has to be imported, which mostly largely we are doing today, it puts a strong burden on our, physical deficit, right? Or, our physical accounting for the country. So, one is, we can't afford to do that. It will become the oil is for us today, or it is becoming like that. So we should not be in that state. The second, the whole semiconductor industry is growing. And we have an opportunity to serve not only the India market, but the global semiconductor market that is doubling itself in the next few years. Because we have technology know-how, we have the skills that are required for it. It's a matter of putting up the right manufacturing over here. And the last one, I would say, just from the security part of it, this is one of the very key ingredients for any world economy to grow. If you squeeze the semiconductor or the technology, especially for the countries who are who are going to be more and more dependent on technology to serve our people across India, I think we will be taking a big risk if we do not have a big participation in the overall global semiconductor ecosystem, right? So that would be the reason I would say we should have it. Now, many countries are doing very similar. The disbalance that you talked about in the Southeast Asia of manufacturing, that we have more than 60% manufacturing happening in only a couple of countries in Southeast Asia. Now, countries like European countries, the US CHIP Act, the European CHIP Act, the India's $10 billion incentivization for manufacturing. These are all the initiatives towards making the balance or creating the balance in the next 5 to 10 years, which is a little bit disbalanced at this point of time, right? So I hope you got the answer, but that what it's absolutely required, but it's a complex industry, so you have to take the right measures to make it happen.
And I know we are getting to the end of time, but maybe one question, and Pavan, if you could give a very short, sharp response. You mentioned that China +1 is becoming a big discussion everywhere. What would be the top 2 or 3 things in your view that we need to do in India to make sure we actually realize the opportunity that lies ahead of us?
I think first thing is understanding this ecosystem and not taking very quick, or let me say hasty decisions. When Navjit was speaking about Petronas, his company's name is Gentari, which is in renewables. It's the offspring of Petronas. Similarly, Statoil in Norway, large oil company, has changed its name to Equinor to distance itself from oil. But tomorrow, it should not so happen that we have to call Gentari Petro, because we do not know that how rare earths are going to play. What is the importance of rare earths in wind power and in solar power? And if rare earths will get blocked, then we will have to depend on some other source of energy. So not taking any hasty decisions without understanding the ecosystem and emerging trends. That's one thing from the policymaker side. The second thing is, this PLI is very good, but there should be regulatory predictability, and also there should be price predictability, because power, etc., which this industry is finally churning out, many a time what is happening, the cases for power pricing are ending in the court, because if solar module prices goes down, then the government is saying that this is what the price was fixed at, but because the solar module price has gone down, you should now be paid less retrospectively. So these are some of the points which we should not get into a knee jerk. The policy making should be evidence-based policy making, staying at the cutting edge of knowledge, and changing things when you are clear about the changing direction of the wind.
Great, thank you. I think we are almost at the end of time. This is a topic on which we can have a very long discussion, and I'm sure we got very short but pointed inputs from all the panelists. Maybe I'll just end with a factoid, closing out the loop on the India opportunity. So as geopolitics move, I think there is a big opportunity ahead for India to become a manufacturing base. And of course, there are many things, as Pavan also said, which we need to work on. But as an example, if you take all goods exports to the US, India's goods exports to the US increased by almost 45% in the last 5 years. In the same period, China's goods exports into the US decreased by 10%. So that indicates where the trend or the trajectory is. But just as a sobering additional factor under that, even after that 10% decline, China still exports $500 billion of goods into the US. While India, even after the 44% increase, exports just about $30 billion or $40 billion. So, which I look at as an opportunity and a white space that we can go after. But with that, thank you, very big thank you to all the panelists for a great discussion, and thank you to the audience.